In this episode, we take a deeper look at one of the most important standard pairs in modern security management, because International Organization for Standardization, ISO 27001 and ISO 27002 show up again and again whenever organizations want a disciplined way to manage information security. For a brand new learner, the names can sound formal and a little distant, as if they belong only in audit rooms or certification reports. A better way to think about them is as structured guidance for how an organization should organize, govern, and improve its security efforts over time. They matter because security gets inconsistent very quickly when every team uses a different definition of good practice, a different way of thinking about risk, and a different idea of who is responsible for what. ISO 27001 and ISO 27002 help create a shared model so security is not left to personal preference, scattered habits, or whatever the loudest problem happens to be that week. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is to separate the two standards in your mind, because many beginners treat them like different names for the same thing. They are closely related, but they are not doing the exact same job. ISO 27001 is about requirements for building and running an information security management system, ISMS, which means it is focused on the management structure that keeps security organized and accountable. ISO 27002 is more about guidance for information security controls, which means it helps organizations think through what kinds of protective measures and practices can support that management system in real life. One standard is more focused on the system of management, and the other is more focused on the control guidance that supports secure operation. When you understand that division, the pair becomes much easier to follow because you stop seeing two competing books and start seeing one management standard supported by one practical control guide. The heart of ISO 27001 is the idea that security should be managed as a system instead of as a pile of disconnected activities. That sounds simple, but it represents a very important shift in mindset. Many organizations do security work without fully managing security as an organized capability. They may have policies, tools, training sessions, risk meetings, and incident plans, but those pieces do not always fit together in a clear and accountable way. ISO 27001 pushes the organization to create something more disciplined than that. It asks the organization to establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve a structured approach to information security. That means security is treated as an ongoing management responsibility tied to leadership attention, organizational objectives, and risk-based decision-making rather than as a set of isolated technical fixes that appear only after problems become visible. That management system idea is one of the most valuable parts of ISO 27001 for new learners because it changes the question from what security tools do we have to how are we managing security as an organizational responsibility. A management system is concerned with scope, ownership, direction, consistency, review, and improvement. It asks what part of the organization is included, what information and processes matter most, what leadership expects, how roles are assigned, and how the organization knows whether the security program is actually functioning. This matters because security programs often fail not because nobody cared, but because the work was never turned into a coherent system. One team handled access in one way, another handled vendors in another way, and a third handled incidents with no shared structure behind any of it. ISO 27001 helps pull those moving parts into one more intentional model so the organization can govern security instead of simply hoping that good individual efforts will somehow add up to lasting protection. Another important part of ISO 27001 is its risk-based nature, because the standard does not assume that every organization should protect everything in exactly the same way. This is one of its strengths. A hospital, a manufacturer, a bank, a university, and a software firm all face security concerns, but they do not face the same mix of business priorities, data sensitivity, legal pressure, operational dependence, and customer expectation. ISO 27001 is useful because it allows security management to be shaped around the organization's real context. That means the organization needs to understand its information assets, the threats and weaknesses that matter most, the consequences of failure, and the types of controls that make sense in that environment. Instead of pushing one uniform security recipe onto everyone, the standard supports a more thoughtful approach in which protection is connected to actual risk. That is very important in management-oriented security work because mature leaders rarely ask only what is possible. They ask what is appropriate, justifiable, and sustainable here. This risk-based approach also helps correct a common misconception about formal security standards, which is the belief that they are mostly about paperwork. Documentation matters, but the deeper purpose is decision discipline. When an organization uses ISO 27001 well, it is not simply creating documents for an auditor to read. It is creating a repeatable way to make security choices, assign ownership, review performance, and improve over time. That process requires thought because the organization must decide what matters, what exposures are acceptable, which controls are necessary, and how those controls will be supported by people and processes. In that sense, ISO 27001 is not a static model at all. It is meant to drive an ongoing cycle of understanding, action, review, and improvement. That matters to beginners because it shows that mature security is not based on one-time effort. It is based on an operating rhythm in which security is revisited, tested by experience, and improved as the organization learns more about itself and its environment. Where ISO 27001 gives the organization the management structure, ISO 27002 helps give it practical control guidance. That is why the two standards are so often discussed together. Once an organization has decided that it will manage information security systematically, it still needs a sensible way to think about the controls that support that decision. ISO 27002 helps by describing commonly accepted control areas and giving guidance about how those controls can be understood and applied. For a beginner, the easiest way to think about it is that ISO 27001 asks the organization to manage security through a formal system, while ISO 27002 helps the organization think through the kinds of controls that can make that system real. Without ISO 27002, a team might understand that controls are needed but remain uncertain about how to organize them conceptually. Without ISO 27001, a team might gather controls without building the management discipline needed to support them in a consistent way. One reason ISO 27002 is so valuable is that it helps people see security as broader than purely technical defense. Modern guidance in this family organizes controls in a way that reflects organizational, people, physical, and technological dimensions of security. That structure is helpful because it reminds learners that good protection depends on much more than firewalls, encryption, and system settings. Organizations also need clear governance, assigned responsibilities, human awareness, physical safeguards, and operational discipline. A person can easily overlook that when first entering cybersecurity because technical tools are often the most visible part of the field. ISO 27002 helps correct that narrow view. It shows that information security includes how leaders define expectations, how employees handle information, how facilities are protected, how incidents are managed, how suppliers are considered, and how technical safeguards support all of those areas rather than replacing them. That makes the standard especially useful for students who are trying to move beyond a tool-centered understanding of security. The relationship between the two standards becomes easier to grasp when you picture them working together in one real organization. Imagine a company that wants to protect customer information more consistently, reduce uncertainty about risk, and create a more reliable security program. ISO 27001 gives that company the management structure for doing the work in an accountable and repeatable way. It pushes the organization to define scope, understand context, involve leadership, think in terms of risk, and commit to improvement. ISO 27002 then helps the organization think through the control areas that can support those goals in practice. The first standard helps answer how security should be managed as a system, and the second helps answer what kinds of control practices can support that system. That relationship is one of the most important things to understand in this deep dive, because many people mistakenly try to learn the controls without understanding the management structure, or they talk about the management system without appreciating the controls that make it meaningful. Another part of the conversation that often confuses beginners is certification. Because ISO 27001 is a requirement standard for an information security management system, organizations can pursue formal certification against it through outside assessment. That can be useful, especially when customers, partners, or stakeholders want evidence that the organization has adopted a recognized management approach. Even so, it is very important to understand what certification does and does not mean. It does not mean the organization is immune from incidents, free from mistakes, or perfect in every control decision. It means the organization has established and maintained an information security management system that can be assessed against the standards requirements. That distinction matters because many people hear that a company is certified and assume that the company must therefore be secure in every possible sense. Mature security professionals do not make that mistake. They understand that certification can demonstrate structure, discipline, and commitment, but it does not eliminate commitment. But it does not eliminate risk or replace thoughtful management. That point leads to a broader misconception worth clearing up, which is the idea that ISO 27001 and ISO 27002 are only relevant to compliance teams. In reality, they are useful to leaders, security managers, operational teams, auditors, project teams, and business stakeholders because they create a common language for thinking about responsibility and protection. A business leader may care that risks are being managed and that customer trust is preserved. A security manager may care that roles are defined and improvements are sustained. An auditor may care that evidence exists and responsibilities are visible. An operations team may care that the expectations are clear and realistic. These standards matter to all of them because they help connect governance, control, and accountability. That is one reason the ISO approach remains influential. It does not treat information security as a niche technical subject belonging only to specialists. It treats it as an organizational discipline that must involve leadership, process, behavior, and oversight if it is going to last. A simple example can make the standards feel much more concrete. Picture a growing healthcare technology company that handles sensitive information, relies heavily on cloud services, and works with outside vendors. The company knows security matters, but the program has developed unevenly. Some teams classify information carefully, others do not. Some managers take supplier risk seriously, others assume contracts are enough. Incident planning exists, but ownership is fuzzy and improvement happens only after obvious failures. In that environment, ISO 27001 would help the organization create a more coherent management system so leadership, scope, risk thinking, ownership, and review become more consistent. ISO 27002 would then help the company think through the control areas needed to support that system across governance, people, facilities, and technology. The result would not be instant perfection, but it would be a shift from scattered effort toward a more disciplined, repeatable, and explainable security program. For someone studying the Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, path, these standards matter because they reinforce exactly the kind of thinking security managers need. CISM is heavily concerned with governance, risk management, program development, and incident management. ISO 27001 supports that mindset by showing how security can be managed as a formal system connected to leadership direction and continual improvement. ISO 27002 supports it by showing how control thinking fits into that larger system without becoming detached from organizational purpose. Together, they help students understand that effective security leadership is not only about spotting threats or choosing controls. It is about creating structure, assigning accountability, making risk-based choices, and ensuring that security becomes a functioning management capability rather than a collection of disconnected tasks. That makes this pair especially important for learners who want to understand how serious organizations turn security from an aspiration into an operating reality. Another valuable lesson from these standards is that security must include people and culture, not just policies and tools. A weak culture can undermine even well-written procedures, while poor role clarity can turn good intentions into confusion. ISO 27001 and ISO 27002 both point in a broader direction where security is shaped by leadership behavior, defined responsibilities, awareness, supplier relationships, physical safeguards, and technological protections working together. For beginners, that is a major conceptual upgrade. It helps explain why some organizations with good technology still struggle and why others become more resilient, because their security efforts are organized, reviewed, and supported across the whole business. Once you see security in that wider way, the standards start making much more sense. They are not trying to turn organizations into paperwork machines. They are trying to help organizations become disciplined enough that security decisions are clear, repeatable, and aligned with what the business actually needs to protect. When you step back and look at the full picture, ISO 27001 and ISO 27002 become far less intimidating than they often sound at first. One gives the organization a structured management system for information security, and the other gives practical control guidance that helps support that system in real operations. Together, they encourage leadership attention, risk-based decision-making, defined ownership, broader control thinking, and continual improvement over time. That is why they remain so important in governance and security discussions. They help organizations move beyond improvised security and toward a model where protection is managed deliberately, reviewed regularly, and tied to business reality. For a student on the CISM path, that is the deeper lesson to carry forward. Strong security is not only about having good intentions or powerful tools. It is about building a system that helps the organization protect what matters in a disciplined, accountable, and sustainable way.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.